Hey guys, welcome back. It's Lucky here, and it's now 2023. So let's talk about the state of the MMO genre and go over the most played MMOs right now. This video is strictly by the numbers, which means I'm not ranking them by quality, simply by the active player base size. We'll use active players and Google Trends to determine whether these MMOs are moving up or down on this list, which MMOs are dying, which MMOs are thriving. Let's find out. First up, and number 13 on the list, is going to be EVE Online with an estimated 250,000 active players, available on PC, Linux, and macOS since 2003. Formerly number 10 on the list, but seeing a few MMOs leap ahead of it this time around, EVE Online is an old dog, released in 2003, but still being actively supported by its developers and its fans. EVE Online is an MMO where your goal is to build and upgrade powerful spaceships so that you can join up with others to vie for control of the most profitable sectors in space. EVE Online is a free-to-play MMO with the option to pay money to do things like access more of your spaceships sooner. It also has an optional sub, and as with most optional subs, fans of the game will often tell you that if you intend to fully enjoy the game, the sub's not so optional. EVE Online has a fantastic character creator, but that matters little as you'll almost never see your character. Your focus is on your ship, and it's what you'll spend most of your time controlling. In EVE Online, players form their own alliances and then battle for control of the universe. PvP in EVE Online is high stakes, as when your ship is destroyed, it does not simply respawn. No, you must build it again. The many hours, days, months worth of materials that you used to build that ship, they're now gone. EVE Online has made headlines as a result of the massive size and scale of some of its player versus player battles, with thousands of players on either side. So how is EVE Online's population health? Well, if we look at the trends, we can see that EVE Online appears to have peaked in 2009, and it's definitely trending down over time, as games typically do after this many years. But with around 250,000 active players, it's far from dead. EVE Online recently overhauled its new player experience and seems to be completely committed to maintaining the game for years to come. Number 12 on the list, Star Wars: The Old Republic, with an estimated 280,000 active players, released in 2011 on PC. The last time I made this list, I kept it to the top 10, and so SWTOR didn't quite make the cut. SWTOR is another MMO that is definitely peaked at its launch, something that will be a very familiar sight when we look at all of these trends. SWTOR launched in 2011, developed by BioWare and published by EA. This is another MMO that is now free to play with an optional sub. That optional sub will unlock a lot of things, but most importantly, it will give you access to all of the zones in the game forever, even if you only sub for 1 month and then cancel. Veterans of the game will tell you that if you want to actually experience SWTOR, that's exactly what you'll need to do. Subscribe for a month and then quit the subscription if you want to. SWTOR is probably best known for its amazing class stories that immerse you in the world of Star Wars. The class stories are fully voice acted and are incredibly well fleshed out and written. Perhaps the most unique part of these stories is that your choices actually have an impact on the ending of your story, with up to 3 different endings possible for each class. This is definitely one of the coolest parts about SWTOR. Finding a good MMO can be hard. Finding something fun to do on your phone doesn't have to be. Raid Shadow Legends has been downloaded over 80 million times and is also the sponsor of this video. It's also completely free to play. Raid has an amazing new faction called the Sylvan Watchers. The Sylvan Watchers made their home in the Mistwood, a huge jungle in the east of Teleria. If the beasts in this land don't kill you, the Sylvan probably will for trespassing on their land. There's loads of character variety in this faction, with each champion being in tune with nature in a unique way. Some have plants and mushrooms growing off of them, while others are literal trees. And to kick off the new year, there's a fresh raid update with a bunch of new features, including a new season of the Forge Pass for all of your artificers, the Polarium Points program where you can earn goodies in game, including a legendary champion and more. And in preparation of Raid's 4th anniversary later this year, this month sees the launch of the 4th anniversary Titan event. This new type of event lasts for several weeks and will see you earning anniversary points by competing in special themed events. Raid has also released a legendary champion based off of MMA and pro wrestling legend Ronda Rousey. You can get Ronda for free right now, whether or not you're a longtime player, just by logging into Raid. All you have to do is log in and play for 7 days between now and February 20th, and Ronda's yours. To celebrate Ronda's arrival in Raid, use code RAIDRONDA to get a bunch of helpful stuff. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, click my link in the description below or scan the QR code on screen right now for a unique bonus worth $30. We're talking a free epic champion, Chinoru, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy fill, and 1 epic skill tome. All this treasure will be waiting for you here, available for 30 days for new players only. Thanks for listening. Now back to our video about the most played MMOs today. Unfortunately for SWTOR, however, is that the last expansion left a lot to be desired, with the community lamenting the fact that it offered barely a few hours of entertainment per faction. It's left the community wondering about the future of the game. Will it continue to be supported, or is it nearing the end of its days? This is another theme that seems to resonate with a lot of MMO communities right now, as it looks like there's a lot of developers who have quietly begun work on their next big MMO. Still, Star Wars: The Old Republic Republic is a largely single player experience, and if you've never done it before, it could be a lot of fun, particularly if you're a fan of the Star Wars universe. You'll get Star Wars music, art, stories, and lightsabers. The game features 8 classes split 4 and 4 between Jedi and Sith, with a lot of overlap between the classes on each side, almost as if one side is a near mirror image of the other side. It's not a bad game to pick up and to play with a friend, as it does feature level scaling, which has resulted in the questing experience being very easy. So you'd definitely be jumping in for the story rather than the challenge. So how does the population health look? Well, it's a bit all over the place. The game has done a decent job of holding a relatively flat level of interest, although it's definitely on the decline. Still, it's been enough to keep it ahead of EVE Online and is the 12th most popular MMO in the world. That's nothing to sneeze at, but I think the Star Wars franchise is capable of being more than number 12. Number 11 on the list, with an estimated 300,000 active players, released in 2012 on PC. Guild Wars 2 has fallen a few places on this list as it moves farther from its immensely successful End of Dragons expansion. It's worth pointing out though that on average, Guild Wars 2 is trending up over the last few years despite its position on the list. Guild Wars 2 had an explosive launch back in 2012 and has since been one of the most popular MMOs on the market. Guild Wars 2 is a free-to-play MMORPG developed by ArenaNet and published by NCSoft. As MMOs go, Guild Wars 2 does an exceptional job of encouraging exploration and completion, and tried hard to break the mold of having players run from one yellow exclamation mark to the next, and largely succeeded in this effort. You quest for areas as opposed to questing for specific NPCs, and you don't have to run back to an NPC to turn the quest in most times. Guild Wars 2 features a very generous free trial. The first 80 levels are free, and the game does not feature a sub. Not even one of those quote-unquote optional subs that we've mentioned a couple times already in this video. So when it says you can play it for free, it means it. After the first 80 levels, there's a lot of great content to be had in the expansions. However, these will need to be purchased, and these expansions definitely house the best content in the game. It's here where you'll get to interact with the amazing gliding and mount system that Guild Wars has become known for. They recently overhauled their new player experience a bit for their recent Steam launch, which has allowed you to get access to the first mount very early in the game, as opposed to having to wait until you hit 80 and get into that first expansion to get your mount, which was a welcome change. The mounts and the exploration are definitely the part of the game that I fell in love with Guild Wars 2, sprinting around on the mounts in this game and going to high up canopies and jumping off and then opening my glider as I fell back to the ground was just such a uniquely fun experience. I felt for a long time that the mounts in Guild Wars 2 were the best in any MMO, and it wasn't even close. Well, Blizzard agreed and basically imported the Griffin mount from Guild Wars 2 straight into their MMO. It wasn't at all a surprise to see Blizzard do this. In fact, in one of my old Guild Wars 2 reviews, I mentioned that I couldn't believe another MMO hadn't been inspired by the mounts in Guild Wars 2 yet. Well, now they have, and it was a huge success. The Guild Wars 2 main story quest is all entirely voice acted. Both your character and all the characters you interact with are voiced. This adds a lot to the story, as you'll get to see your character laugh and cry and go through all the emotions that dialogue boxes are never able to convey in that level of detail. One of the most memorable parts of Guild Wars 2 is the meta events, where upwards of 100 players group up to take down dragons the size of skyscrapers. These fights are truly a sight to behold, and it's really cool to see that many people in a community all get together to take things down. As far as world events in any MMO goes, Guild Wars 2 still takes the crown. So how's Guild Wars 2 trending? Well, it's actually been growing since late 2020, early 2021, helping to put some room between it and SWTOR, and even bowling further ahead of EVE Online. Next up, at number 10 on the list, is MapleStory, with an estimated 320,000 active players. MapleStory launched in 2003 in the East and 2005 in the West. This was the gateway into the MMORPGs for a lot of modern day MMO players. It was immensely successful and still managed to stay relevant nearly 2 decades later. MapleStory is a free-to-play, 2D, side-scrolling, massively multiplayer, online role-playing game developed by Wizhet and published by Nexon. That's a mouthful. So far, the game has reached over 260 million registered users worldwide and grossed over $3 billion in lifetime revenue. To put that into perspective, the only MMO that comes even close to having that many people try it is World of Warcraft. It's got 42 different classes for you to try and offers an incredibly unique and accessible experience. So if your computer specs aren't the greatest, or if you want something completely different, perhaps give this game a try. It's got 2 decades worth of content, so there's plenty for you to do. How's interest in the game been? Well, it peaked in popularity back in 2009 or so, and then declined for a number of years before settling where it's at now, finding itself trading places with heavy hitters like SWTOR and Guild Wars 2. Next up, we have RuneScape, dropping 1 spot on the list from number 8 to number 9, with an estimated player base size of 330,000 active players. RuneScape, also known as RuneScape 3, a fantasy MMORPG originally built with Java to be played inside of your browser. Kids were playing this MMO on library computers all over the place back in the early 2000s. Over 20 years later, this game is still outrageously popular, so let's take a look at it. RuneScape is interesting because there's RuneScape and then there's old school RuneScape. We'll get into old school RuneScape later. Right now, we're going to talk about RuneScape. RuneScape. RuneScape was originally released all the way back in 2001 as a browser game, but that's largely changed now. As of 2016, the browser version was mostly replaced with a standalone client. RuneScape is a game where you can level anything by doing that thing, level fishing by fishing, level magic by using magic. It's a grindy MMO with tons of content, seeing as it's been getting new content for over 20 years. As much as RuneScape has evolved past its sibling Old School RuneScape, it's still very much the old school MMO experience. Slow-paced fights, basic combat, and not so state-of-the-art graphics. RuneScape did add a WoW-like ability system and a very contentious cash shop as it aged, leading to the birth of its younger, older sibling, Old School RuneScape, which we'll talk about later in the video. The pay-to-win nature of this cash shop didn't go over well with the community, and in a strange but telling twist, the classic version of the game without the pay-to-win cash shop has ended up with way more players than the modern version. If we look at the trend for RuneScape, you can see how insanely popular it was back in the mid-2000s. Absolutely massive popularity. If you were an MMO player and you weren't playing WoW, there was a good chance that you were dabbling in RuneScape. More recently, RuneScape is far from its peak and it's trending down, but it's continued to do well enough to hold on to the 9th spot on this list after 2 decades on this planet. That's still pretty impressive. Next up, we have number 8 on the list, The Elder Scrolls Online, with an estimated active player base count of 340,000. Elder Scrolls Online has slipped 1 place on this list from the last time, moving from number 7 to number 8. Elder Scrolls Online is a beautiful theme park MMO set in the Elder Scrolls universe and takes place about 950 years before Skyrim. This is one of the youngest games on this list, and it's 8 years old. It features the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS. ESO has 12-player raids, 4-player dungeons, as well as a ton of single-player content for you to enjoy. There are 3 tiers of difficulty for each of these things, allowing players to push themselves farther and farther. It definitely leans toward the casual MMO player and stands out as one of the more story-driven MMO experiences out there. Every quest, and I do mean every single quest, is voice acted, every single word of it. ESO is buy to play with an optional sub, so if you want, you could just pick up the base game, forego the sub, and still get hundreds of hours out of the base game. However, in order to fully experience the game, you're definitely going to have to pick up that sub. My only piece of advice if you try ESO is steer clear of those loot crates. The drop rates are abysmally low. Outside of that, it's a pretty good game and it's not pay to win. Elder Scrolls Online features action combat, which is often a love it or hate it topic for players that try this MMO out. If you're used to tab targeting MMOs of old, it's going to take a bit of time to get used to this game's combat. With the last 2 expansions falling short of player expectations, all eyes are on the 2023 expansion, with fans of the game hoping that ZOS goes big this time. This could be a make or break year for the game. If we look at the trends, ESO seems to be sliding downward, especially losing its footing in the last couple of years. It has seen a nice pop here recently, as it normally does this time of year, as it begins to ramp up marketing in preparation for its announcement of the next expansion. This bump was enough to keep it above RuneScape, but just barely. The population is still very healthy for this MMO, and thanks to the fact that it features mega servers, the population is not fragmented like most other MMOs, which means you don't have any problems finding people to play with, which is unfortunately one of the major problems with the next MMO on this list. If you're enjoying the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more MMO content. Next up, at number 7, we have New World, with an estimated 350,000 active players. New World didn't even make this list the last time I made it. That's how poorly it was doing then and how amazing it's doing now. Presently, it's sitting at number 7 on my list of most played MMORPGs thanks to an absolutely stellar first expansion. If you ask AGS, they said this wasn't an expansion, this was more of a free patch. Either way, it was a huge hit. Does this mean that their first expansion is going to be even bigger than Brimstone Sands was? That's an exciting prospect. I'm going to give the award of most improved MMO in 2022 to New World. It was a night and day different game than it was the last time I made this list. The developers have held on to zero stubbornness and have given way to nearly all of the community's major requests to improve the game. The game is usually on sale for anywhere between $20 and $40, and that's it. You get the whole game for a single purchase, and you'd be hard pressed to find fairer monetization in any MMO out right now. New World features a massive, seamless open world for you to explore, and that's where it really shines. It shines when you're out exploring, questing, killing, and gathering, and all the things you stumble into along the way. Every tree, bush, or rock can be gathered to level up your crafting and gathering. New World features the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS, and has some incredibly challenging dungeons and a mutation system for those dungeons that basically acts like a Mythic Plus system from WoW. This content can be incredibly fun, but it can also be difficult to find groups, which is what I was touching on earlier. Hopefully for New World's sake, cross-server dungeon queues become a thing. Unfortunately, New World doesn't have any raids yet, but they have announced that they are working on it and that this giant sandworm in Brimstone Sands Sands is going to be the first raid boss. How epic is that? I can't wait. If we look at the trends for this game, it's been steadily going up as it approached the launch of the Fresh Start servers after Brimstone Sands launched. And it's now settling back down, likely due to the fact that while the content that's in the game is great, it's still very light on content compared to its more seasoned competitors. It's possible to have a fantastic couple of months in the game and do everything that it has to offer, which I think is exactly what's happening to a lot of players. They're going in, having a ton of fun, and then running out of things to do in this young MMO. I fully expect them to return the next time AGS adds any significant content to the game. Next up, moving up 3 places from the last time I made this list, is Black Desert Online, with an estimated 370,000 players, released in 2015 on PlayStation, Windows, Xbox, iOS, and Android. BDO is an open world game with very little in the way of instance content. You don't play BDO for dungeons and raids, you play BDO to go out and kill things in the open world, often for hours just to gain a few percent of a level. BDO is very much a grindy game. Very important to note is that it's an always on PvP game. Once you hit a certain level, the PvP is on. Anyone can kill you anytime. Just seems like something you'd want to know before you jump in. While players love the combat, you'll often hear them lament the gear upgrade system, which is oftentimes described as one of the most frustrating gear upgrade systems in any MMO. It involves a lot of chance and potentially a lot of gambling, and you know how gambling goes. The house always wins. BDO features a ton of unique classes and continues to actively update the game, but how is the game's population trending as of late? Let's take a look at the trends. The game's launch was incredible and garnered a ton of interest. Since then, it does seem to be sliding, and as of late, it looks like the most recent expansion did little to increase interest in the game. Once again, despite the fact that it isn't reaching the same levels of interest as it did in its prime, it's still got an impressive number of active players, which is enough to raise it to number 6 on the list today. Retaining its spot at number 5 on the list is World of Warcraft Classic, with an estimated 520,000 active players, released in 2019 on PC and Mac. In March of 2017, Blizzard finally caved and announced that they would be making World of Warcraft Classic. WoW Classic launched to massive appeal, much to the surprise of Blizzard, who actually thought there was no way players would want a Classic server. The spin-off of the retail version of the game was so popular that it holds down the 5th spot on the list. It's insane that the Classic version of an MMO sits this high on the list, but this isn't the only MMO that's achieved this, and we'll discuss that later. World of Warcraft Classic was a return to WoW before its first expansion, and then in 2021 it added Brunnen Crusade, and a year later Wrath of the Lich King, which was another hit with the community. WoW Classic is the classic MMO experience through and through, slower combat and a strict adherence to the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS. It was also a direct mainline injection of nostalgia for every MMO veteran that lived through the early years of WoW. It's going to be interesting to see how long this nostalgia-fueled trip through classic WoW can maintain its steam. Some fear that Wrath of the Lich King was the peak of the WoW experience for many, and that it will be the peak of the classic experience, but others aren't convinced. If we look at the Google Trends for WoW Classic, we can see its explosive launch in 2019, followed by a moderate level of interest in the months and years to follow, though that interest is clearly declining recently due to 2 things. 1, players are simply beating the content. They've cleared the raid enough times to either have the gear or to not want to run it anymore, and other players have left because they were simply playing Classic until Dragonflight launched. It's important to know that there's a lot of players who bounce between Classic and retail, using one to fill the gaps in the other. WoW Classic was number 5 on the list last time I made it. It's still number 5 now. It's pretty impressive for a spin-off of an existing MMO, and further proof that there is a strong appetite for the classic MMO experience in 2023. Next up, dropping from number 3 to number 4 is Lost Ark, with an estimated 630,000 active players. Lost Ark is the youngest MMO on this list, and is a free-to-play top-down MMORPG that launched in the East in 2019, and then finally here in the West in 2022. Like I said before, Lost Ark is a beautiful MMORPG that kind of feels like Diablo and Final Fantasy had a baby, and then that baby grew up to have a gambling addiction. The game itself is well polished and has loads of content thanks to the fact that it launched years earlier in the East. It does also have a cash shop and a gear progression system that will frequently remind you of those Eastern roots. The game is absolutely pay to win, but you can also choose to play it for completely free if you want to. There are more currencies than you can count, and your gear progression involves multiple layers of gambling with said currencies. Despite its top-down view, it features impressive dungeons and raids, and these are definitely some of the most popular content the game has to offer. The ultimate goal in Lost Ark is to sail around the world and to collect all of the things while increasing your character's power. Yeah, you heard me right, it's got sailing and is pretty fun. One of Lost Ark's biggest strengths is its combat, as a lot of players will tell you the combat is extremely satisfying. On top of that, the game has at least 17 different classes with more on the way, each with their own look and feel to make sure that anyone can find the right class for them. If we look at Lost Ark's trends, we can see that interest in Lost Ark exploded in February of 2022 when it launched in the West, and then quickly dropped back down below World of Warcraft while still remaining above heavy hitters like WoW Classic, BDO, and ESO. Last time I made this video, Lost Ark was fairly new, and I was curious to see how well it would retain its players. It looks like it's lost half its players since then, and that's not bad at all. Lost Ark gets a lot of flack for having a lot of bots, and if you've booted it up recently, that's pretty fair. This isn't to say that the game doesn't have a ton of real players as well, as it's unlikely these Google trends are swayed by bots in the same way that, say, Steam charts are. Another game that gets accused of having a lot of bots is number 3 on the list, Old School RuneScape, with an estimated 1.42 million active players. Old School RuneScape has fallen one spot on the list, from number 2 to number 3. Old School RuneScape launched back in 2013 and continues to climb as if it's completely unaware that MMOs are supposed to become less popular with age. You can play this on a computer, a phone, and probably a toaster. The system requirements are so low that it's probably the most accessible MMO out there, and I think it owes a lot of its success to this. On top of that, Old School RuneScape is a game run by the players, with each significant change voted on by the player base. Old School RuneScape launched as a result of the community not loving the changes that were being made to the retail version of the game. Retail RuneScape added WoW-like abilities and a cash shop that many accuse of introducing pay-to-win to the game, and the community begged the developers for the creation of Old School RuneScape. Jagex finally agreed and created servers that were based on the 2007 version of the game. RuneScape does not have the player follow a linear storyline, but instead has the player choose their own path through the game. Players can choose to kill monsters, go off questing, or level up one of their many different skills. Old School RuneScape is a make the numbers go up game. You skill up, you level up your crafting, your sword wielding, your fishing, anything you can think of by doing that thing. You can level it up, and a lot of people enjoy doing this. RuneScape is a very sandboxy MMO that allows for a lot of AFK skilling, and thanks to its slow pace and incredibly low computer requirements, it's very accessible. That doesn't mean it's an overly simple game. It's got some pretty involved quests that would be near impossible to figure out without the help of add-ons and guides, but it is as old school as it gets, with a very clunky combat system and clunky user interface. It will take some patience and getting used to if you're going to try to play the game in 2023 for the first time. Old School RuneScape was made available on Android and iOS and was the most downloaded mobile game in 8 different countries in less than 2 weeks, and I'd wager this is a big part of why it's so popular today. Old School RuneScape has been so successful that its active player count has now far eclipsed retail RuneScape and a lot of other MMOs for that matter. If we look at how the game is trended on Google, we can see by the line here that it has held some pretty persistent interest, spending most of its time just behind World of Warcraft and ahead of everything else. By the numbers, it looks like it's landed number 3 on the list, pretty impressive for being born from a browser game that was released in 2001. Again, you can dismiss its success and say that it's all bots, but once again, that would fail to explain its massive presence on Google Trends. Next up, the MMO that held the number 1 spot on this list the last time I made it is Final Fantasy XIV, with an estimated 1.56 million active players. Final Fantasy XIV is another MMO that didn't know it wasn't supposed to age like wine, getting bigger and better year after year for a lot of years. In the last year, it has seen a bit of a drop-off as it falls back to earth from the insane success of its Endwalker expansion. Still, even after this fall, it's the second most popular MMO in the world, an insane accomplishment. Final Fantasy XIV is a fantasy MMORPG that places a massive focus on the story. The single-player story content comes first, and every piece of the game that follows is built in service to that end. The dungeons are unlocked as part of the story, the trials are unlocked by and woven into the story. Some of the most memorable cutscenes in the game are delivered in the middle of a trial while you're fighting for your life. Final Fantasy XIV is a master storyteller. It also features 20 different classes and the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS. Final Fantasy XIV has a free trial where you can play the first 60 levels for free. After that, you'll have to buy the game and pay a mandatory sub. Thanks to this mandatory sub, however, the game is free of pay to win, it's free of loot boxes, and it has hundreds of cosmetics amounts that you can earn in-game by playing the game. With its initial 10-year story wrapped up, it's going to be fascinating to watch and see what direction they go with the story in their next expansion, and just as importantly, how many people show up. Will it continue to be one of the only MMOs that experiences long-term growth? If we look at how Final Fantasy is trending on Google, it's been battling WoW for the top spot for the last year, but with the launch of Dragonflight, all of that has changed. Now for number 1 on this list, World of Warcraft, with an estimated 2.36 million players, released in 2004 on PC and Mac. Well guys, the king is back. Last time I made this list, this old dog was sitting in the depths of its Shadowland expansion. At number 4 on the list, it was the worst of days for World of Warcraft, but that's over now. Dragonflight has been an amazing success, propelling WoW back into the number 1 slot. Critics have loved Dragonflight, as have players, as have I. It's been a refreshing change of direction for the game, with a lot of WoW players feeling like the devs have finally started to hear their cries for change. People have spent their entire lives playing World of Warcraft, with some players now clocking 18 years played. It's a testament to the massive appeal that this game was able to garner. World of Warcraft is a massive seamless MMO that still handles scale better than almost any MMO I've played. You can see locations multiple zones away, get on your mount, and fly there. This is still something that a lot of MMOs created today failed to deliver on. Despite its age, WoW still looks pretty good thanks to an art style that has aged incredibly well over the years and multiple engine overhauls. WoW features the trinity of tank, healer, and DPS and has 13 unique classes, each with multiple different specs. There is a lot of content for every type of player in WoW. There's a lot of single player content as you level your way up, as well as dungeons and raids. WoW's dungeons and raids are among the best out there, but be prepared to devote a good chunk of your time to them, as they're quite a bit longer than most MMO's dungeons and raids today. So what does interest in WoW look like according to Google Trends? You can see on this graph how WoW absolutely dwarfs the competition in its prime. Looking at its popularity from 2004 to 2012, nothing even comes close, not even today. And while WoW fell a long way from its prime, if you look at the last 5 years, there's still a substantial gap between the interest in WoW and the interest in any other MMO that we've discussed so far. This titan in the industry is still just that, a titan in the industry. And with the success of Dragonflight, it's back in the #1 spot, and it's not even close. It's worth mentioning that WoW's rise wasn't overnight. It's been on an upward trend for over a year now, but can it maintain its momentum this time? We'll check back on it later in the year, but for now, it's the #1 MMO by a long shot. It was an amazing year for MMOs. We've seen multiple MMOs drop absolutely stunning expansions, like WoW's Dragonflight, Guild Wars 2's End of Dragons, Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker, and New World's Brimstone Sands. We've also seen some duds from Star Wars Old Republic and Elder Scrolls Online. Here's hoping those MMOs are able to turn it around in 2023. It's worth pointing out that 2023 is going to have its share of excitement in the MMO sphere as well, with the addition of multiple new MMOs of varying types and qualities. Be sure to check out my video on that, linked in the description down below. But before I go, did any of the results on this list surprise you? Let me know in the comments below. Which MMOs do you think are going to move up or down this year, and where will the new MMOs in 2013 fall on this list? Be sure to like the video and to subscribe to the channel to find out, as I continue to cover these MMOs like the degenerate MMO player I am. As always, a massive shout out and a massive thank you to my YouTube members. To become a YouTube member, click the join button below for access to a private Discord channel, behind the scenes footage, and more. Sincerely, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.